Hello everyone and welcome. I'm going to go ahead and read chapter number 3 of a book I've written called The Wind at Major Creek. Major Creek is a body of water that ran a small stream that ran through my grandfather Kitchen's property in Lyle, Washington. Grandpa had purchased that property, about 125 acres or so. It had a couple of houses on it, some barns and things, and he farmed it for alfalfa. He also worked at a mill in Bingen, at a lumber mill in Bingen, but then also raised the alfalfa there for many, many years. Grandma worked at a grocery store, the meat market at a grocery store in White Salmon during those years. And the part of the property that he had where Major Creek ran through was, we knew as kids that it had been an Indian village in the past. There was a spot on the cliff that they had built up a conical shaped type of lookout tower that was there. And we would play in those things. We would look for arrowheads and little pieces of broken pottery and all of that. Years went on, and things changed in our universe, and the state of Washington wanted to reclaim that land, and so Grandpa and Grandma agreed to sell or give that land back to the state, but that they would be able to live in it until they passed away. And when they passed away, my grandma was last to die. Then the state took that land, removed their house, removed everything, made it so that you can't even tell that they were ever there, and turned it into a natural preserve. There's walking trails through there. There's a bench actually that has my grandpa's name on it. And but then years later, we lived in Astoria. My wife and I lived in Astoria, Oregon. Went to Lewis and Clark. We'd go visit the Fort Clatsop where Lewis and Clark spent the winter, and we learned that actually my grandparents' property was actually recorded in Lewis and Clark's journal. They spent the night at that Indian village at the mouth of the Columbia, or at the mouth of the Major Creek where it ran into the Columbia River. And so I've written this fictional book called The Wind at Major Creek, just telling an imaginative story about Major Creek from the early days of the Indians when Lewis and Clark would have met with them, and then all the way to the times that we knew it. So this is chapter number 3. It's called The Iron Path. The year was 1906, and the Columbia River Gorge was no longer the silent cathedral of the Klickitat. It had become a construction site of gargantuan proportions. The air, which had carried the scent of crushed sage, drying fish, and the cold, damp breath of the river, was now thick with the acrid, biting stench of blasting powder, coal smoke, and the sweat of 10,000 men. Elias Thorne, foreman from Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railway, stood on a precipice of basalt looking down at the confluence of Major Creek and the Columbia. He was a man built of iron and spite, his face etched by years of working in the high-stakes, high-fatality environment of Western expansion. To him, the gorge was not a landscape, it was a logistical problem to be solved with dynamite and steel. Below him, the river churned, a massive swirling beast that had carved this path through the mountains over centuries. But even the river was being forced to yield. The railroad was a ribbon of order being drawn across the chaos of nature. It was the manifest destiny of a nation, and it would not be stopped by cliffs, canyons, or the ghosts of people who had lived in the shadows of these rocks for centuries. "Bring the charges up," Elias roared, his voice barely audible over the thundering roar of the river. A crew of laborers, mostly immigrants from Europe and China, men who had traded their own ancestral landscapes for a chance at a wage, struggled up the steep embankment. They carried heavy crates of blasting powder, their boats sliding on the loose basalt scree. They were the shock troops of the industrial age, tasked with the impossible, to break the spine of the Cascades. Elias looked at the spot where the old indigenous village had once stood. By 1906, the village was no more than a memory, a scattering of artifacts buried beneath the accumulating layers of silt and modern neglect. The lookout, that ancient human-sculpted crescent of stone where Tamsky once stood to watch for the salmon, was currently being drilled for the placement of a primary charge. He didn't know it was sacred site. To him, it was just a stubborn outcrop of rock that blocked the path of the tracks. "Place it right in the center," Elias commanded, gesturing to the crescent. We need to clear that shelf so the rail bed can flush against the slope. We can't have any shifting once the engine starts running through here." The workers began the back-breaking labor of drilling into the basalt. The sound of the rhythmic metallic clink, clink, clink of the steel drill bits against the rock echoed through the canyon, a sharp dissonant counterpoint to the rush of the water. It was the sound of the world ending for the landscape as it had existed. Elias walked down to the creek, his boots sinking into the soft, dark soil of the delta. He stopped by the water's edge and pulled a flask from his own coat, taking a long pull of harsh, burning whiskey. He felt the vibration of the river in his boots, a constant rhythmic shaking. He looked up at the basalt cliffs towering over him, a testament to the volcanic fury that created this place. He felt a fleeting moment of vertigo. The scale of the place was overwhelming. He was a small man working for a small company, carving a path through a geological titan. But he pushed the feeling aside. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. The railroad was coming, and with it, the connection between the coast and the inland empires. The world was shrinking, and he was the one holding the needle and thread. Suddenly, a dull, muffled thud echoed from the slope above. A plume of gray smoke and rock dust billowed into the air. Elias coughed, waving his hand in front of his face. "That's the start of it," one of the workers shouted, his face smeared with grease and soot. "We've breached the first layer." Elias climbed back up the ridge to inspect the progress. The blast had been successful, too successful. It hadn't just broken the rock, it had shattered the integrity of the slope. Large chunks of basalt, thousands of pounds each, tumbled down the cliffside, crashing into the creek below with a sound like a mountain collapsing. The water surged, white and furious, and the debris choked into its channel. As the dust settled, Elias saw something that made him pause. Among the scattered debris amidst the shattered columns of basalt were pieces of worked stone, sharp obsidian flakes, fragments of a mortar, the smooth, rounded head of a pestle. He knelt, picking up a piece of the obsidian. It was still sharp, even after hundreds of years. He felt the weight of it, the craftsmanship, the intent. "Looks like we found an old camp," a worker remarked, stopping to look over Elias's shoulder. "Probably some digger Indians. They used to hide out in these nooks before the government cleared them out." Elias tossed the shard into the rubble. "Doesn't matter now, clear it away. If we leave that loose stone there, the track will wash out during the first spring freshet. Get the winches, we need to clear the path by sunset." The destruction was systematic. The railroad didn't just pass through the landscape, it demanded that the landscape be transformed. The blasting, the leveling, the dumping of fill, it all erased a topography that existed for 10,000 years. The lookout was obliterated, turned into a ballast and dust. The quiet nooks where the salmon had been harvested were filled with iron and sleepers. By the end of the day, the landscape was physically scarred. The face of the cliff was a raw, bleeding wound of fresh gray rock, starkly different from the weathered, lichen-covered basalt that surrounded it. Elias sat on a pile of railroad ties that evening, watching the sun dip below the Oregon peaks. The river looked different. It looked smaller, confined by the new geography of the railroad. The track was a hard, straight line, a sharp geometry that marked the organic flowing lines of the gorge. He felt a strange, lingering restlessness. He had completed the task, he had carved the path, and he had secured the future of the railroad. But looking at the destruction of the cliffs, he felt a sense of loss he couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't about the history of the people who had lived there, it was about the power of the earth itself. He had broken the silence of the gorge, and he knew with a dark, cynical certainty that it would never be quiet again. "You know, boss," the worker said, sitting down next to him and lighting a pipe, "they say this river is cursed. The Indians say the spirits guard the water. Maybe we shouldn't have been so heavy with the powder." Elias laughed, a cold, humorous sound. "Spirits don't run trains, friend. Money does. And the money says we cut through that mountain no matter what it takes." But as he looked down at the confluence, he saw the dark, swirling water of the Columbia. It looked like it was watching him. He thought of the stone shard he had picked up, the obsidian, the work of a hand that had long since turned to dust. He realized that they weren't just building a railroad, they were displacing an entire history, replacing it with the sound of steam whistles and the grinding of iron wheels. The isolation was gone. The gorge, once a secret, secluded sanctuary, was now a public thoroughfare. The trains would carry the wealth of the interior. They would carry the families. They would carry the industry, and they would carry the noise of the modern world into their heart of the mountains. As the night fell, the wind began to blow. The relentless howling wind of the gorge. It sounded different now. It whistled through the new cuts in the rock, creating a hollow, mournful, almost human sound. Elias stood up and walked to his tent. He was a pioneer of the new world, a builder of the future. But for a moment in the dark, he imagined the spirits the worker had mentioned, the ones who had lived in the lookout, the ones who had watched the river for generations. He imagined them watching, their eyes reflecting the smoke of his fires, their silence a heavy impending weight. He brushed the thought aside. He was a man of the modern age. He didn't believe in ghosts, he believed in progress. He climbed into his cot, closed his eyes, and the sound of the river still echoing in his ears. Tomorrow they'd lay the rails. Tomorrow the iron would be spiked into the ground. Tomorrow the gorge would be permanently, irrevocably altered. And deep in the basalt, in the dark crevices beneath the new rail bed, the fragments of the old world lay silent. The history was not gone. It was simply buried, waiting for someone to come along who remembered how to look beneath the surface. Someone who would see the land not as a commodity to be conquered, but as a legacy to be cherished. But that was a long time away. For now the iron reigned, the path was set, and the Columbia, cold, deep, and indifferent, continued to flow, carrying the debris of the past toward the sea. While the trains of the future stood ready, their steam rising into the cold, high air of the gorge, waiting for the signal to begin the transformation of the West. The silence was dead. The era of the iron path had arrived, and with it, the slow, relentless fading of the world that had been. The gorge was now a place of motion, transition, of passage. It was no longer a place of stillness. It was a place of work, of hunger, and of change. And the wind, the eternal wind of the Columbia, continued to howl, singing a song of loss, a song of memory, a song of the land that refused to be forgotten, even as the steel wheels screamed over its bones. The railroad was the end of the beginning and the beginning of the end. And Elias Thorne, the man of iron and spite, was the agent of this change, a man who thought he was shaping the land, while in reality, the land was simply waiting, silent and patient, for the day when the iron would rust and the rails would be torn up and the wild would reclaim its own. He drifted into a shallow, restless sleep, his mind filled with the sound of blasting, the smell of coal, and the vision of the iron ribbon stretching into the darkness. The scar across the heart of the gorge that would never fully heal, and the silence of the night. The river continued to flow, the only thing that remained truly unchanged, the witness to all that had been and all that would be. The iron path was open, the gorge was open, and the world had moved. So that's chapter 3 of my book, The Wind at Major Creek. You can find this book on Amazon, and you'll see it in the description. You'll be able to find the link for the book. You can get it in Audible or paperback or ebook. And I'd appreciate it if you consider purchasing the book, and it'd be a blessing to me. Thank you. God bless you and keep you. Make his face to shine upon you, be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace.